Apologies, I'm going to start one more time. Hello again, and welcome to today's webinar on the Green Freight Journey. My name is Steve Goldman. I'm a Marketing and Communications Coordinator here at EDF. Just to walk through a couple of logistics as we get started. If you aren't already dialed in, the phone number for the webinar is on the screen. Just so you're aware, today's webinar will be recorded for later viewing and sharing on our website. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat window, and feel free to do so throughout the webinar, and we'll have Q&A at the end. And lastly, the recording and the slides from today's webinar should be available by tomorrow at edf.org/freight. And with that, I just wanted to share a little background if you aren't familiar with Environmental Defense Fund. EDF is a US-based environmental group. We're headquartered in New York, but we have over a dozen offices around the world, including places like Brazil and China, where we've been working for over 25 years. We've grown to over 500 staff, which include scientists, economists, engineers, lawyers, and business and policy experts. And the environmental challenges we're trying to tackle, climate change, threats to public health, preserving ecosystems, protecting our food systems, and other areas, are global, and so the solutions that we develop must be as well. Our Corporate Partnerships program has worked with companies over the last 25 years to help drive sustainability in their operations, strategy, and supply chain management. Our team is filled with experts that cut across all the goal areas, working in areas like natural gas, agriculture and commodities, energy efficiency through our EDF Climate Corps program, including 2 companies in China, and as you're about to hear, retail and supply chains. And to give you a sense, we only collaborate with companies as partners, not as consultants. We see the environment as our only client and businesses as our partners in serving that client. We're the only environmental group that takes no funding from our corporate partners. Generous individuals and foundations fund our work, which enables us to maintain our independence and credibility. And so to avoid potential conflicts of interest, we don't accept funding from the companies that we work with. Lastly, we engage with companies on many levels, from information sharing to public policy advocacy to formal partnership projects that extend over a year in length and result in public announcements. Our payment, as it were, is that we identify best practices by working with companies, and through our agreements with them, are able to share the practices we unearth with other companies, leading to impacts that can spread across the sector. Our partnerships on freight have led to the development of a number of case studies and resources that you'll hear about today. And with that, let me introduce today's speaker. Joining us for today's webinar is Jason Mathers, our Senior Manager for Green Freight here at EDF. Under Jason's guidance, EDF has partnered with heavy equipment manufacturers, CPGs, and retailers to identify and implement strategies that increase carbon efficiency in freight transportation. He's also working to secure new heavy truck fuel efficiency standards that deliver business value and needed emissions reductions, and to ensure that natural gas and other alternative fuels deliver on their promise of emissions reductions. He speaks regularly about freight and fleet efficiency at both corporate sustainability conferences, such as the Green Biz Forum, and at freight transportation events, such as the Council of Supply Chain Professionals Annual Conference and the Journal of Commerce's Inland Distribution Conference. And with that, I'd like to give Jason the floor. Jason?
Great. Thanks so much, Stephen, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I know from looking at the roster that many folks here have been hard at work for a long time on freight efficiency efforts that have sustainability benefits, and so I appreciate the steps that you have already taken to help improve environmental performance and cut costs. Today I want to I'm going to highlight kind of 3 critical themes throughout this presentation. The first one is going to be the strong correlation between reducing freight costs and reducing carbon emissions. We're going to walk through a framework that companies like yours can use to set their green freight efforts up for success. And then lastly, we're going to touch on the tools and resources that EDF has created based on our learnings of retailers and consumer products companies and manufacturers that can be helpful on your journey to green your freight. I want to start this session today with by looking at 2 companies. And these are 2 very different companies that have both worked to optimize the way they move goods to their final destination. And Stephen, if we could move on 2 slides. So the companies are Ocean Spray and Walmart. Ocean Spray is a $2 billion a year company based in Massachusetts, where I work out of. They have a North American distribution operations. Most of their goods moves via third-party logistics firm. They have a small internal sustainability team, and EDF first started engaging with them through a case study series we did with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Center for Transportation and Logistics. Ocean Spray looked at green freight, and they decided to tackle their outbound transportation. For the strategies that they used were a network redesign, kind of an optimization project, and looking at opportunities to shift goods from truck to intermodal rail. And through these efforts, they were able to cut their outbound emissions by 20% and cut costs down 15%. So you can see strong correlation between reducing cost and reducing carbon. Walmart, of course, is the #1 company on the Fortune 500 list, a $470 billion firm in revenue each year. They have a global footprint and an extensive North American distribution operation that's served in part through the 4th largest private fleet in America. Walmart has been a champion on sustainability issues going on a decade now, and EDF has worked on a range of issues with Walmart over the past decade, in part through a small office we have in Bentonville, Arkansas. Walmart has focused its green freight efforts on its private fleet, which again is the 4th largest private fleet in the U.S. And they've decided to focus their approach on increasing fleet efficiency, which they define by delivering more product while driving fewer miles. The outcomes they've seen, they've publicly noted that they've reduced or improved their efficiency by over 80% compared to a 2005 level. And this has enabled them to deliver 830 million more cases while driving 300 million fewer miles. So 2 different companies, 2 different approaches, but similar results in terms of reducing costs and reducing emissions. And there's a couple of key threads that tie these stories and other similar green freight successes together. And at the top of that is that both of these companies took this concept of sustainability or green, and they made it something specific. They came up with specific measurable objectives and metrics that they use to shape and to drive their efforts. And because they had metrics and because they had a clear definition, they were able to focus on the most cost-effective strategies that were available to them, which of course led to both companies achieving cost and emission savings. Now, these freight efficiency projects are important because of their cost savings alone. Companies like Walmart and Ocean Spray are also interested in improving the environmental performance of their operations and their products. Freight is an important component of those efforts for companies like that. So I want to take a moment and talk a little bit about the environmental footprint of freight, and specifically the climate and energy footprint that's associated with the burning of fuels to move products around the globe. And when it comes to freight's climate footprint, lots of companies take the approach of examining footprint through the lens of a product. And if you look around your office right now and you see your smartphone and your monitor and maybe your coffee cup, every one of those products has probably a relatively modest component of its footprint that's associated with product distribution. On the order of 5 to 15% of a product's footprint is often associated with product distribution. Product distribution, though, of course, is something that every product has. And so it's unique in a way that even though it could be modest from a product perspective, multiplied over all the products that we have, the environmental impact of freight adds up. And it's a significant source of climate emissions. In total, it's around 8% of our greenhouse gas emissions here in the U.S. And if you restrict that further and look just at the emissions that are associated with corporate operations, freight is about 15% of the overall impact. I want to look a little bit more into these numbers, and as you'll see on the next slide, when we talk about the emissions impact of freight, we're really talking about the transportation component. So, almost 90% of the climate impact of freight is associated with moving products, whereas the rest is associated with storing them. Now, to add to this picture, freight is a growing source of emissions as well. And in the next slide, we're going to see that over the coming decades, emissions from freight transportation are expected to grow around 40%. And in total and aggregate emissions, this is going to outpace several other areas of our economy. I want to highlight the emissions trend for moving people, which is all the way on the right of this screen. And as you can see, it's going almost exactly the opposite direction of freight transport, where we're looking at seeing significant emissions reductions coming from moving people over the coming decades. And that's largely a function of two key factors. One is that as a society, we're becoming more planful about how we use our personal vehicles. Right? We are combining trips. We are using more public transportation, and this is leading to reductions overall in the miles that we are traveling. And in addition, we're seeing significant increases in the fuel economy of our cars and trucks, or light cars and trucks, and that is expected to continue well in the next several decades. When we look at freight, though, we see that demand for freight services continues to outpace the projected increases in heavy truck efficiency, and this is what's leading to these projections of increased emissions from freight. Now, these emissions aren't preordained. Not only can we reduce the growth of these emissions, but we can actually achieve reductions over the coming decades. And to do that, we need more efficient trucks, and that's why Environmental Defense Fund is working on extending and strengthening heavy truck efficiency standards. But that's not the topic of this webinar. The other aspect we need to reduce these emissions is for companies like yours to use the freight system more efficiently, to get more and more productivity out of all the moves you're making, and combined with more system efficiency and more vehicle efficiency, we can reduce these emissions. I want to kind of take this point on a little bit more and walk through what leads to emissions from freight. Again, climate emissions. Climate emissions are a function of four things. The first thing is the amount of products we send, represented here by either your cube or your weight. The second variable is the distance we send these products. Third is the efficiency of the equipment we're using to move these products. And the fourth is the footprint of the fuel. Right, these are the four levers we have to pull to reduce emissions. And they also set up the solutions that we could pursue to reduce emissions. So the first thing I want to talk about is reducing distribution miles. And when we think about this, I'm going to harken back to where I opened with Ocean Spray. And as you remember, they had a network optimization as part of their strategies that led to about 20% greenhouse gas reductions and 15% cost reductions. What Ocean Spray did there was they added a distribution center to I believe to southern or the central Florida, and then they re-optimized which customers they served from which distribution centers. That took 4.5 million truck miles out of their distribution system. So same cranberries grown in the same bogs up here in New England that end up on the same Walmart shelves across this country, but are traveling 4.5 million fewer miles. And of course, we'll also want to harken back to that Walmart example, where they're delivering, millions and millions more cases of products while traveling 3 million fewer miles as a fleet. Right? And it's things like network optimization, increasing load factors in our outbound transportation that are really critical here to reduce distribution miles. The second component to talk about here is using the most efficient modes and equipment. So, we want to be, using intermodal rail instead of truck when it's feasible, when it's cost effective. We want to be using, ocean freight instead of air freight, again, when feasible and when cost effective. And that really gets to this first part, which is more efficient modes. And then we also want to be, we also want to be using the most efficient equipment to move our products, which means if we have a private fleet, sourcing our vehicles to be the most efficient as possible, and if we use carriers, working with those carriers and providing incentives for them to move into newer, cleaner, more efficient trucks. The third component is to use lower impact fuels, which is critically needed from a long-term solutions perspective. I want to draw your attention to a dimension of these solutions that I think is critically important, and that is, your control as a freight shipper. You have tremendous control over this first part, right? Reduce distribution miles. And I would encourage this to be kind of the bulk of your effort to improve freight efficiencies and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. When it comes to using more efficient modes, this is also an area where shippers have a significant amount of control as long as they're supporting infrastructure. And those mode switches can be big wins and are things that should be high priorities as well. When we move into stuff such as using more efficient equipment, there's most folks on the line probably use common carriers or use third-party carriers, and what we're talking about here is fundamentally influencing the decisions those entities are making. So you're going to have less control here. You have a very powerful tool through the EPA SmartWay program to provide incentives for carriers to improve their efficiency, such as sourcing from carriers that are top earners through the EPA SmartWay program. And then when we get to using lower impact fuels, we are as a freight shipper, you're really several steps removed from the decisions around fuel choice and the footprint of fuels. That said, I think it's important for companies to continue to keep an eye and to do pilot projects where they can on using lower impact fuels, and to support policies that help us build more supply for truly low carbon fuels. Well, we've talked now a lot about what a couple of companies are doing and why companies like them are jumping in or tackling green freight efforts. I want to now move into how these companies are managing their efforts for success. So the first step that we think is really critical, and we've seen has been really important through our work over the last several years, is companies who are having success greening their freight operations and cutting costs are very specific about what they're trying to accomplish, and also very specific on the key performance indicators that they're using to track their performance. Right? Walmart, again, for example, was very clear that they wanted to deliver more products while driving fewer miles, improve the overall efficiency of their fleet operations, and they came up with a very specific key performance indicator, which is cases delivered per gallon of fuel consumed. General Mills just this summer announced an extensive effort to improve the sustainability of its supply chain, including greenhouse gas emissions. And product distribution was a significant part of that focus from a greenhouse gas perspective. General Mills decided that its objective relative to product distribution was to use less transportation fuel, and so its key performance indicator is fuel used to ship a pound of product. So, these are the metrics that these companies are able to use to evaluate projects. Of course, once you define your objective and determine your key metrics, it's critical to take the next step, which is, to launch pilot projects. I'm going to harken back to some case studies that EDF and MIT Center for Transportation Logistics did a couple of years ago, where we were looking at several companies on identifying opportunities they had to improve efficiencies. One of the more challenging cases was Caterpillar, and they were specifically interested in improving the freight efficiency of their inbound flows coming into their large mining truck manufacturing facility in Decatur, Illinois. And there were a couple of key constraints and challenges in this project, which were large mining trucks are fairly low volume unit. So Caterpillar was bringing in supplies as they needed them to meet their products, to keep to manage their inventory, and that resulted in a lot of partially full trucks traveling from the supplier to Decatur. And with MIT, Caterpillar looked at how they could essentially have modified milk runs that would consolidate inbound shipments and help reduce cost and emissions. And what we found was that there were cost and emissions reductions to be had here, around 8% from a greenhouse gas emission savings, 3% from a cost savings. So again, strong correlation, both going in the same direction, both around similar magnitude, and a really great example of opportunities for everybody to be able to improve efficiencies. Ocean Spray was also part of that series, and it had been eyeing using intermodal rail as opposed to truckload for some stock transfer moves. And it used this opportunity to run a pilot on the East Coast to see if it could make the process changes necessary in order to make intermodal rail work. And they found that they could, and they found that there were significant savings from a cost perspective and from an environmental perspective of making these adjustments, again, on the order of 40% cost savings and 68% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions on that specific A to B move. Now, Ocean Spray took the next step based on this pilot and scaled up these learnings. And one of the ways they did that was, again, working with EDF through our Climate Corps program. And I'm going to talk a bit about the Climate Corps program when we get to the tools and resources section. But just briefly, this is a program where EDF matches MBA students between the first and second year with leading companies, and the fellows spend 10 weeks creating an energy management action plan. And so the fellow who was working with Ocean Spray was tasked with trying to identify additional opportunities for Ocean Spray to make the move from truckload to intermodal rail. He focused again on stock transfers, and within the stock transfers identified a few key very high volume lanes where there was a match with existing rail infrastructure. And he found that by moving 75% of the stock transfers on each of these lanes to intermodal, Ocean Spray had an opportunity to reduce its entire outbound greenhouse gas, its entire product distribution footprint from its outbound operations by 10%. So these are significant, significant environmental savings that are paired with also with some significant cost savings. I want to now talk about the next step that we see companies taking, and this is, I think, a really true leadership step, which is to declare a goal. Right? And that goals are critically important because they ensure long-term support for your efforts, and they keep a focus on that kind of bread and butter, continuous improvement, and continuous improvements on freight efficiency, on costs, on greenhouse gas emissions. Walmart has had a goal in place for going on a decade to double their fleet efficiency by the end of 2015, and they are well on their way to doing that. And what I really appreciate about their approach is, again, how it just drives a focus on really core freight efficiency principles. And there was an article in Inbound Logistics last year where Elizabeth Fretheim, who is with Walmart Transportation, was quoted, and she noted that, quote, "We want to accomplish 3 goals: fill every trailer to capacity, drive those trailers the fewest miles possible, and use the most efficient equipment. All these efforts drive sustainability and operational improvements." And again, like filling every trailer to capacity, driving those trailers to the fewest miles possible, and using the most efficient equipment are bedrock logistics principles, and they've been able to kind of keep a focus on those through a sustainability lens because they've had a long-term goal out there. Unilever has also set an impressive goal, which is to reduce their emissions to 2010 levels by 2020, and which I believe is about I believe the company was saying it's on the order of about 40% reduction from a business as usual perspective in emissions. So a significant undertaking. And what I really like about this goal is the fact that it is it's greenhouse gas focused and that it's network wide. And so I think here again a really impressive goal. So the steps that we've been walking through here make up the heart of a green freight journey. And this is a framework that we're thinking companies can follow to improve their freight efficiency and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And just kind of to refresh what we're talking about with the green freight journey, step 1 is to define your objectives and to set really clear key performance indicators. Step 2 is to identify a couple of pilot projects and to initiate those in order to build support for your efforts, and use those and evaluate those projects with your key performance indicators. Those products that are delivering on the environmental and financial returns that you want, well then with those you take the next step and you accelerate performance, right? You scale those up, and you also look for other opportunities to improve your efficiencies. To ensure a long-term focus, you take the 4th step and you declare a goal. And I think the goals are really critically important because of this focus on continuous improvement. And goals are also really important because a well thought out goal with really clear metrics help kill silly projects that are distractions. Right? And over a 5-year period or a 10-year period, there's going to be those projects that pop up from time to time that someone might think, hey, this is, someone did this, they got a good press release, why aren't we doing that? Right? Well, you can go back and say, we're not doing that because it's not going to move the needle on these metrics that we were very clear about. And of course, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving freight efficiency are long-term undertakings. And so when you reach your goal, it's time to celebrate successes, share your lessons learned, and also time to raise the bar and to set a new challenge and tackle something where you can reduce even more emissions and try to improve efficiency by even greater amounts. So I want to take a moment now and just pivot to the tools that EDF has created based on our work over the last couple of years and just highlight these tools that we think are helpful for companies trying to make progress from greening freight and reducing costs. So the first one I want to talk about is our Green Freight Handbook, and this is our kind of comprehensive tool. It's a very detailed guidebook. I mean, on the order of like 60 or 70 pages that provides a lot of guidance on project types. Helps companies identify pilots or promotes new project ideas through our Green Freight Diagnostic tool. It's really at the heart of this handbook. We have a extensive section on managing green freight efforts that includes advice for building support and collecting and tracking data. There is a section on key performance indicators that companies could use to track their progress, and we also review how to calculate greenhouse gas emissions from freight using fuel data and point users to many other existing resources that can help them do that. And then lastly, we include recommendations for goal setting, including talking about what makes for a good goal and having some benchmarking in there of goals that we're seeing other companies make in order to help folks get some sense of the parameters and of goals that are out there and things that they might want to undertake. Then the other resource that I want to talk about is our Climate Corps program, and this is, as I mentioned with Ocean Spray, was a Climate Corps host last year, and was our first host to ask a fellow to work on product distribution. And it's a great program. It's a program we've had around since 2007, and this is a program where we take EDF recruits and trains MBA candidates between the first and second year, and we place them with companies such as yours, and through developing, the companies and the fellows develop, work with EDF, develop a work plan, and then the fellows spend 10 weeks creating an energy management action plan for the companies. It's been a wildly successful program. We have well over 100 companies signing up for this year over year, a lot of repeat companies, and over the since we launched this program in 2007, these fellows have found nearly $1.4 billion in energy savings, which is an average of over $1 million identified for each participating organization. Now, the companies pay the fellows directly. They pay them a stipend, and they also pay for a small bit of travel for the training that EDF has, and then a networking event at the end of the summer. So it's, I think, a total about a $15,000 investment from the company. And again, these are folks who are delivering on average $1 million in savings. So it's a great way to add capacity. And I think the best value of this is you're going to get a smart student, a passionate student, and the student's going to come into your organization not just with the knowledge of the tools and that EDF has developed. We're going to look for someone who also has some background in the area that you're focusing on. And this person will also come with access to the 100+ other fellows who are out there working on energy management action plans this summer. And the fellows form a really tight bond, and they spend a lot of time sharing lessons with each other and pointing out resources. So there's just kind of a scaling in their learning that's really incredible and really powerful, and that's why we think it's one of the reasons we think this is a really great program. So with that, I want to thank you all for taking the time for listening today. And before we go to questions, I want to ask you all to do two things. And number one is to go to our website, edf.org/freight, and download the Green Freight Handbook. it's free and it's a good resource. We think it's a good resource. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And it's a comprehensive resource to help you in your green freight journey. And then I'd also encourage everyone here to think about what are 2 projects that you could launch this year that would help you take the next step in your green freight journey. And just jot those down. And when you're thinking through that, you're coming up with the concern that you don't have the capacity to move those forward. Give us a call, reach out to me to talk about the EDF Climate Corps program, because I think, again, it's a great way to add some capacity in a short-term basis and really be able to move the ball forward. So with that, thank you again for taking your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jason. It was a lot of information, a lot of great resources, and I was going to open up the floor to questions that have been coming in. I thought I'd start with one that just came in over the chat. That rail has a perception with industry as not being terribly punctual with delivery, and the person asking said, was this an issue with ocean spray, and how did you overcome that barrier when talking to, how do you overcome this barrier when talking to industry to promote more modal shift?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Stephen. It wasn't a problem with ocean spray. I think ocean spray. The reliability of rail was there for them. It did take, the transit times were a bit longer. I believe it was they needed to add a day in transit, so they needed to accommodate that from the ordering cycles and in organizing the drayage runs. And they felt that was all worth it. I mean, 40% cost reduction is pretty significant. And for them, on the places that they've looked into rail, from my knowledge, they've had reliability has not been an issue.
Well, great. Let me ask you a few more that have come in. What type of data is needed to track greenhouse gas emissions from product distribution, and where does this data typically live?
It's a good question. So a lot of the data, so first of all, so there's a couple of pieces of data that you need to know. The best data is fuel consumption data. Outside of that, if you know the amount of product you're sending via cube or via weight, and you know the distance, and those are the foundation. And then there's a series of emissions factors that you can apply to those. And those are that we have identified a bunch of those in the Green Freight Handbook. And those are based on the mode. There's a different emissions factor for truck versus rail, as well as there's actually different emissions factors you could get for different types of trucking, for LTL versus tanker versus truckload. And so again, you need to know how much stuff you're sending it, how far you're sending it, and you need to know how you're sending it. And that is where that data lives. That a lot of that data is in the transportation management software that most large freight shippers have access to.
Okay. Well, we got a great question in that I think is a good follow-up to that as well. Are most companies, i.e. shippers, relying on carriers to provide greenhouse gas calculations, or are they doing it themselves? And do most carriers or 3PLs use a standard calculation to report their GHG emissions?
All right, so on the first question, I've definitely seen both, right? I think that, for example, I know a lot of the rail carriers provide regular greenhouse gas data. There are, I'm sure, a number of kind of full service 3PLs or 4PLs that provide or could provide greenhouse gas emissions data. I think most of the companies that I've engaged with have been doing these calculations on their own as well. So I think it's kind of it's a mix and match. For sure. And sorry, the second aspect of that question, Stephen, could you read that again?
Sure. Whether or not most carriers or 3PLs use a standard calculation for reporting greenhouse gases.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there is, I don't know that most carriers are using a standard process. That said, there is a standard process. So, you could ask your carriers, are you doing, what's your process for calculating emissions, right? There is a greenhouse gas protocol, that is used, put out, I think, by World Resources Institute. And there's a group called Smart Freight Center out of the Netherlands, which is also, working to standardize freight emission calculations. So it's a good question to ask, and I do think that right now, I think there's probably the assumption probably should be that there's not consistency. So it's worth asking questions and making sure that if you have different folks quoting you different greenhouse gas numbers for potential services, that you understand a bit of where those numbers are coming from.
Okay. We just had speaking of calculations, we had another good question come in. How are most people defining or calculating distance? Meaning, are they saying point to point as the crow flies, or the route that the package actually travels, i.e. accounting for hubs? And before you answer, I just want to ask everybody that if you do have more questions, feel free to keep them coming via the chat window. We're getting great questions so far. We'd love to keep this dialogue going.
Yeah, so it should be, it should be the distance the package actually travels. So, I think that, again, a lot of this would be dependent on the data that you're collecting in your transportation management software, right? If you know that, if you're using truckload, that you're going to go from, an A to B route, there should be, I'm sure there's some number there on number of miles or assumed number of miles traveled, right? I mean, it's probably if the trucker has to get off the road and for a fueling station, or if there's some deviation from the route, that's not reported, that's not captured, that's fine. But you should have some. I think the best practice would be to have a reasonable assumptions of the actual miles traveled.
Great. We have a few more questions coming in, but feel free to submit more through the chat window if you like. You had referenced the need for greater truck efficiency. Can you give us an update on the EPA and DOT's heavy truck fuel efficiency and greenhouse gas program?
Yeah, great. So the EPA and the Department of Transportation put forward greenhouse gas, the first ever greenhouse gas program for heavy-duty trucks, and this captures everything from a tractor-trailer truck down to kind of like a Ford F-250. And the first standards that ever went into place last January 2014, and they won't run through 2016. And they increase efficiency across a range of vehicles, I believe on the order of about 15%. The first generation standards have been, particularly for tractor-trailer trucks, widely embraced. We've seen a record year in truck sales, and I've seen many folks attributing that in part to the greenhouse gas standards, including Ryder, one of the largest fleets in America. And of course, these were standards that were embraced by the American Trucking Association and United Auto Workers, as well as Environmental Defense Fund and other advocates. Last February, President Obama announced that he was directing the EPA and the DOT to undertake a second round of standards, and he called on the agencies to announce draft standards in March of 2015. So as far as we understand, that's still the time frame that the agencies are going on. And as environmental advocates, we're calling for standards that would reduce fuel consumption from new trucks on the order of 40% compared to 2010. And we believe those are technically feasible, economically viable, and they're certainly environmentally necessary. And so I'd be happy to talk at greater length to anyone who's interested in learning more about the technologies available, the cost effectiveness of them, or other aspects of these rules. So folks are interested, they can reach out to me directly on that.
And just in case you missed it before, I'm just going to flash the slide in case you do want to reach out to Jason after this call. Here's his email address, so it's easy to reach out to him, as well as the URL for accessing the resources we've been talking about. Jason, I was going to bring a couple more questions in from the chat. One good one was, what trends in the logistics industry do you think could advance sustainability? And what trends do you think present challenges for sustainability, conversely?
Good question. I think let me kind of start with so on what trends I think provide opportunity. I am just generally excited about the more and more data available in the hands of transportation executives. And I think there's a couple of things that are really exciting about this. First, it helps in greater optimization of networks, identifying where there's less productive assets, and the like. And I also think it's more data is critically important on identifying opportunities for collaboration. One of the stories that I've really been fascinated with this year is work that Kimberly-Clark, Colgate, and CVS have had. In my understanding, this isn't a project that we've had really any involvement with or any insight on other than what's in the trade press, is that these companies, Kimberly-Clark and Colgate, of course, are delivering products to CVS. And they are working to co-load freight. So instead of one truck, Kimberly-Clark having a 3/4 full truck and Colgate having a 3/4 full truck, right? They're coordinating their order cycles so that they're delivering in full trucks. And over the course of the year, this is meaning lots and lots of truck trips that are not needed. And so there's great financial savings here. There's great greenhouse gas savings here. There's just great system efficiencies here as well, because less trucks means less congestion, so the trucks can go a little bit faster. So, and I think that's all the power of data that's pushing that. On stuff that could present challenges, I think that the whole push towards consumer, direct to consumer, is you could go either way, right? I think there's some really great things from a sustainability perspective, and there's potential challenges as well. And so I think from a perspective of a shipper who's trying to figure out how do you understand omni-channel, how do you make it work from a cost perspective, how do you make it work from a sustainability perspective, it's something that I think folks need to be real thoughtful of, planful of, and ultimately, I think that there's really exciting opportunities, because if you pair it with collaboration, ultimately omni-channel probably means having the same amount of inventory more dispersed, which could lead to, if you continue to kind of run your own operations, less productive truck moves. Yet if you use that as an opportunity to further increase collaboration, you could be improving efficiency through the entire system. So, I think this is going to be a kind of a defining trend over the next, decade, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that, it moves the needle forward from a emissions and cost perspective.
And omnichannel is something you've been writing about recently on the EDF business blog, am I correct?
Yes, yeah, we posted about it about a month or so back.
Okay, it's something that I think people could check out if you have an interest, which is our blog is up on business.edf.org/blog. Another question that came in while we're on the topic of challenges is what impact will declining oil prices have on the need to address sustainability?
Lots of easy questions today, Stephen.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's when I think about this, right? I think that the long, some of this gets back to goals, right? And why you need a long-term focus, and why, in many ways, it's important to tie freight efficiency and green freight together. And that we're trying to make improvements not just for next year, but for a decade from now, right? And I think that you're still going to, I don't know what the price of fuel is going to be, tomorrow, let alone a year from now, let alone 10 years from now. But I think that the pressures from a sustainability perspective aren't going to abate, and I would assume that there's going to be increases, that fuel prices are going to rebound to some extent. So I think that I'd encourage folks to continue to move forward and to be pushing efficiency, and to be from a sustainability perspective, from a cost perspective, and I think that there's good opportunities here. If you can make something work now, right, with lower prices, you could definitely make it work a year from now if prices rebound. And then I guess lastly, I'd point out that while folks are very familiar with how much gasoline has gone down, diesel's still up around $3 a gallon, right? The reductions in diesel have not been quite as great as from gasoline because of a whole bunch of sub aspects in the diesel market. So I think long-term focus, it's still really critically important to be pushing both on a system efficiency from a freight perspective and a greenhouse gas efficiency perspective for sustainability.
Thanks, Jason. Well, I wanted to ask you, this came in also, somebody was asking on the subject of Climate Corps, because you talked a fair bit about that. Can you talk about how EDF matches fellows with host companies?
Yeah, sure. So I think the process is, hosts submit applications mid-February, and they're kind of going into that, right? There's usually a few conversations to make sure there's a good fit between what the company wants and what EDF Climate Corps is able to deliver, and then as part of that process is starting the development of a work plan, and with a work plan, kind of a framework in hand, we work to recruit and identify fellows from the pool of I think last year we had over 700 applicants, right? From the pool of applicants that have the talents that you're seeking, right? So, for example, Eric Chappelle, who we placed with Ocean Spray, had previous work experience from in a logistics and supply chain perspective. So we look to we look to take that work plan and match it with find a candidate who meets that. We identify one candidate match, and then the candidate and the companies get to have an interview and decide if it's a good fit for both of them. And if the company decides it's not, then we go back to our pool and see if there's another candidate who's available that would be a good fit for them. So it's an iterative process, and it does take significantly into account what the specific project objectives are that the company is looking to accomplish.
Thanks for that. I have another one coming in. People are wondering, beyond the Green Freight Handbook, beyond EDF Climate Corps, what are some other non-EDF resources available to help people with green freight efforts? And before you answer, I just want to ask everybody, I typed this in the chat window, but we have just a couple more minutes left. We have 4 minutes to go, so if you do have any additional questions, please get them in now. Thanks. Jason?
Yeah, no, it's great. So I think I'm sure most folks know of EPA Smart Way program, which is celebrating their 10th year this past year. Fantastic resource for freight efficiency, and I think particularly for how shippers and carriers engage. I'm a big fan of case studies, so I spend a lot of time looking at folks like logistics management and inbound logistics and DC Velocity, where there's fairly regularly a good amount of information about companies who are making freight efficiency improvements that also have sustainability benefits. Yeah, I mean, I think those would be the ones that really hop out to me. Folks who are really interested in ocean shipping, there's a clean cargo working group put on, which is organized by a group called Business for Social Responsibility, and they are working on a whole host of issues around maritime issues, largely greenhouse gases, but not exclusively. So there's a lot of folks out there.
Thanks for that. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think we'll take this opportunity to wind down, unless anyone has a last question they'd like to put to Jason.
Great. Well, Stephen, thank you for moderating, and thanks everyone for joining this. And I'd say, again, we're here as an advocacy organization to share our learnings from the work that we've done. And you should feel free to reach out to us. Be happy to have conversations, join brainstorming, or even have more specific discussions around goals, projects, or additional resources. I think this is an area that we're focusing a lot on, and that can be really big. It can have really significant impacts from a cost and from an environmental perspective. So thank you for your interest, and thanks for the work that you've done on this today, and good luck in the work you're going to be doing on it going forward.
And just before we log off, just want to show you the URL one more time if you want to go download the Green Freight Handbook from our website, or if you're looking for information on the EDF Climate Corps, you can find that at edfclimatecorps.org. So thanks for your time today. Hope you found this very informative. We'll be doing EDF will be doing more webinars in the future, so keep an eye on our website at business.edf.org. And with that, have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time.